Okay, the meeting is now being recorded. My name is Bob Wiseman, your host for the 4th Digital Transformation in Government Conference. And right now, I just want to know, before I introduce the speaker, is that we have 3 streams going on concurrently. We have got Jonathan Joint from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity dealing with cybersecurity training, followed by Caleb Walker and Greg Lane that are going to be talking about upskilling and training people based on these skills framework for the information age, better known as SFIA or SOFIA. Okay, for that, we got Jacques Trottier from Transport Canada talking about process mining. It's sort of a case study, and he heads the Center of Excellence for Innovation at Transport Canada. We'll also have Nadja Mariel Garib, and she's going to be presenting from on process mining and robotic process automation. Okay, for that. Now, we are fortunate we're going to have Marina, and I'll introduce her in a moment. And her presentation is going to be followed by Bruno Wallet, Director of Enterprise Architecture for the Canadian Border Services Agency. He's going to be talking about digital transformation of CBSA enabled by CSA, by Enterprise Architecture. I apologize. So without further ado, I welcome very much Marina Van Koughnett from the sunny city of Calgary, Canada. And she's going to be talking about operations management and cyber compliance in the energy sector. And this is important for anybody who thinks in terms of Internet of Things and how the energy industry is complying now with respect to cyber resiliency. Okay, for that. Anyways, and one of the first things that she starts off with her abstract is change is hard. And yes, it is. And she'll be elaborating on that. And again, it'll be it's a recurrent theme through all the presentations about cultural issues. Marina has 19 years experience in the power generation industry, much of which has been focused on delivering organizational change. The changes range from process improvements to a generation business operating model implementation, and subsequent governance of its policies, standards, processes, and technologies. Today, Marina is responsible for asset management systems, governance, and compliance, which includes cybersecurity compliance for electrical generating assets. Marina holds a degree in computer engineering from Queen's University. And without further ado, over to you, Marina.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you for the warm introduction. So today I am going to be talking about just that, change, and I'm going to be drawing on my years of experience in helping to drive and deliver change by way of examples and stories, in the hopes that hopefully through these stories and experiences that I'm going to share with you, that you can draw on those experiences and use them for yourself, for your own projects, and to be more successful in any changes that you may be looking to drive within your own organizations. So I work with TransAlta, and TransAlta is really a leader in clean electricity, and we're incredibly committed to having and working towards a sustainable future across all the areas in which we operate, and being a key participant in helping to achieve that sustainable future. And that's not by accident that we've been working towards becoming that clean energy leader in the electricity industry. It's intentional and it's by design. You can see that today our portfolio is already largely renewables based. We've got some hydro generation. We have quite a lot of wind, solar. We've got battery storage as well. We do still have some thermal generation. We've got a number of gas plants, and we've got one remaining coal facility as well. We operate across Canada, across the US, and across Western Australia. And in all 3 of those jurisdictions, we're continuing to grow and expand our presence in the renewables energy space. And as I mentioned before, we're very proud of our history of being able to support the emissions and energy reduction targets of Canada in particular. As a matter of fact, TransAlta alone has helped to deliver 9 to 10% of Canada's overall emissions reductions target of 4 to 45% by 2030. Now, from a balance sheet standpoint, that tells a story, right? It means that by 2025, we will have transitioned to having 70% of our revenue and earnings coming from our renewables portfolio. So both on the slide before where we talked about the impact that we're having, and here in terms of an EBITDA representation of those change, what it maybe doesn't truly get across is how significant a change that is for us at an organizational level. Simply put, operating coal facilities that require many hundreds of employees and are supported by mines, which we own and operate as well, again, supported by hundreds of employees and fair degree of complexity, is simply not the same as operating a business that has many, many, many smaller generation assets spread over across wider geography that are simpler and less complex. And simply take a smaller employee base to be able to run and operate. So as an organization, this strategic change that we've been driving and actively working towards has meant a tremendous amount of change as well. And I'll touch on that in some of the stories that I share with you today. Myself, as mentioned in the introduction, I've spent 19 years in the electrical energy industry, all of it actually at TransAlta. And I've had many opportunities to be able to drive quite a bit of change and also observe a lot of change within the organization across that time. And it's from this experience that I will be drawing on stories and sharing them with you today. Now, my thesis really for today's conversation and for change in general is that it really doesn't matter what kind of change you're trying to drive, be it technical, trying to implement new risk frameworks or engineering standards, technological, bringing in new systems and tools, or trying to get those systems and tools integrating and working more effectively together, be it process changes, just fundamentally changing how the work is happening within the business, strategic like our clean energy transition, or organizational, just restructuring roles and responsibilities and how people work within the organization. Regardless of the type of change that you're trying to drive, they all have one thing in common. They all have people in common. And the fact that you're going to be asking people to adopt new tools and systems, change how they make decisions, change the technology that they're using, take on new roles and responsibilities, and perhaps push aside other roles and responsibilities that they had before. Those are all fundamentally behavior changes that you're trying to embed and drive within your organization. And that takes an investment in change management. And in my experience, implementing programs and projects, the technical issues, the process issues, the philosophical disagreements, we can work through those. We can get those worked through and addressed. Where changes tend to struggle, though, is when you don't factor in the people and you don't make people at the center of your change and put enough focus on helping them to adopt those new behavior changes and communicating why that's important and supporting them as they continue to practice this new behavior until it becomes habit. So that's really what all my stories are going to center on, is coming back to the central theme of different types of change and how a focus on people either helped us to get to the desired result, or perhaps a lack of focus on people is what contributed to perhaps some of the failures that I'll share with you today. So stories. I was intentional and deliberate about wanting this presentation to be a series of stories because fundamentally, I really believe that if you put forward stories that help people connect to the point, that's going to support the changes in a way that logic and argument and reasoning just simply don't impact people in the same ways. And so I'm going to share with you an example of exactly that. As part of the process safety program that we were implementing, we were looking to drive a change in how we manage bypasses at our power plants. Now, it's not important to necessarily know what a bypass is, but simply put, it was a decision-making process that we utilize within our power plants to try and assess the risk of operating those assets differently when there's a piece of equipment that perhaps is not functioning as it ought to or has perhaps failed. And we utilize this bypass management process at times to try and help us continue to generate safely. Now, I wasn't actually trying to change the process itself. I was simply trying to put a little bit more structure and rigor to the decision-making element of it. And we had tools and processes already that every individual in our company was accustomed to using and adopting that would support this more rigorous risk assessment. We had our management of change process. And so all I was asking the leadership across our different sites to do was to sign up, support, and agree and drive the behavior change that when they were going to go and look to make a decision about implementing a bypass, that they would utilize this management of change process and tool that they were all already very familiar with. So again, just a formalization of a risk assessment. And I thought at the outset, this would be simple, right? This would be 2 weeks, have the conversations, get everybody agreed, update the standards and the policies, and move forward and monitor and start looking for the behavior change to start taking place in the organization. And I was wrong. Instead, what ended up happening was I phoned up the operations chiefs for our sites, who are the head operations leader, the people responsible for safety and production of those sites. And I started citing to them, industry stats and other industry failures that all pointed back to bypasses not being adequately risk assessed as root causes for these other failures, started talking about how this was going to support the overall program. And simply put, I got nowhere in those conversations. As a matter of fact, months later, I started getting a fair bit of pressure from our leadership. Why is this, of all the changes we were trying to drive, probably one of the simplest ones, why was this one stalling out? And I was at a loss. I didn't understand or know why. So one day I ended up getting one of these operations chiefs on the phone, one of the only ones who actually wasn't pushing back on this particular change. And I just asked him, I was frustrated. And I said, look, I do not understand why I cannot seem to get this change of all the changes across the line. And why is it that you're so supportive of this and all of your peers really are not? And he paused. And when he continued, he proceeded to tell me a story about how at his previous organization, when he was in the role of operations chief, his team had implemented a bypass and perhaps hadn't done as full-blown a risk assessment as they could have done. And it almost ended up killing someone. It was a very, very near miss. And that experience had really stuck with him. And so anything that he could do from that point on to make sure that the decision-making process was structured and rigorous in relation to bypasses, he was absolutely committed to not only following and having his teams follow, but also to supporting across the organization. So I made the decision to take him and put him in the room with all the other operations chiefs from across our business, and simply asked that he just share the exact same story that he had shared with me, with the rest of them. And at the end of that 1-hour meeting and discussion, I had full and complete alignment from all the operations chiefs across our business that this was indeed the right thing to do, that they were committed to supporting it, they were going to stand behind it, and they were going to help drive this change within their organizations as well. And it wasn't because they didn't have facts and figures before to try and support this change. It was the impact of this personal experience that this individual had had that helped them to actually lean into and accept the work required to help drive this behavior change. So don't underestimate the use of stories to help drive behavior changes, because stories fundamentally help drive your culture, which will support the changes that you're trying to implement. So I mentioned that this bypass management change, it was part of this larger process safety program that we were looking to implement across our entire generation business. And although that program in the end was very, very hugely successful, and we got it across the line and we delivered a lot of change to the organization, trying to get that program launched and get it going was surprisingly hard. As a matter of fact, it took us approximately 2 years to get from idea and concept to get to the point where we had an approved business case and a program that we were actually ready to start implementing. And the longest part of that 2 years, and probably the most frustrating for myself and the other 2 or 3 people who were all trying to drive the change, was the first 14 months. You see, for the first 14 months, we were trying to convince others in the organization that these changes that we wanted to implement would improve our balance sheet. They would improve our ability to do financial forecasting. They would improve the predictability of our results and thus allow us to better manage our costs. They would improve the availability of the units. They would improve the reliability of the units. You know, all these things that seemingly on the surface are incredibly important to an organization. And don't get me wrong, they are important to an organization. But it wasn't getting us the momentum and the buy-in and the support that we needed to be able to move forward with such a large scale of project. So we started reaching out to other organizations who'd been through similar changes. And one such organization that we ended up connecting with was a company called Scottish Power. And they'd done an implementation very similar to what we wanted to do a couple years prior. And the first word of advice that they gave us when they connected and we started having these discussions was that we weren't communicating the need for the program in a way that was going to be meaningful and impactful and cause people to be motivated about wanting to invest in the change. Simply put, the messaging that we needed to put forward needed to be dippy. It needed to be something that was going to cut across the brain's natural ability to filter out so much information and register with people on an inherent level. And it needed to be something that people were going to be motivated to make the energy investment that's required to adopt and build new behaviors and help drive those behavior changes within their organizations as well that they ran and operated. Because you see, they knew very well the size and the scope of the change we were driving, and they knew it wasn't small what we were proposing. So after 14 months of trying very hard to get momentum and frankly getting not very far, we decided to take their advice. And we changed the messaging around the program and switched and transitioned it to a process safety message. The activities and the work that we were proposing weren't any different. But simply putting it as process safety and communicating it as a change that was going to help them to make sure that their employees, their friends, their coworkers, their colleagues were going to be safer, that made a huge difference in terms of allowing us to move forward. As a matter of fact, within 2 months of having changed that messaging, we had every single manager, director, vice president within the generation business, within the IT business, within our procurement business, within our health and safety and engineering departments, all standing in front of our CEO, declaring that not only did they support the change, but that they thought that we absolutely had to go through with the change that was being proposed. So don't underestimate our natural biology and how our brains work when considering the change, and try to work with that instead of against it. So let me take you forward a little bit, again, with this process safety program that we were implementing. Fast forward to the time where we had approval, right? The organization had gone in front of our CEO, they'd announced their support and their engagement for this initiative. We now had the funding to be able to go forward and do detailed assessments, get a business case together, get an implementation program designed and ready to go. So we were exceptionally excited because it took us a lot of time and energy to get to this point. And at this point in time, we knew enough to know that we needed to bring in some expertise that were going to help us on the change management front. So we brought in a professional change management expert. And within 24 hours of them coming in and joining the team, they essentially locked us in a room, the 4 of us that were on the team at the time, locked us in a room and threw away the metaphorical key and said, okay, no one's allowed out of this room until you can very clearly and concisely communicate what this change is that you're trying to do, the whys and the what of the change. Now, at the time, I had a project management background. There was lots to do, many, many different activities, and working on a clear and concise communication message, it didn't feel like it should bubble up to the top of the priorities for the entirety of the team. But nonetheless, they persisted. And after 3 days, when we were finally able to articulate what it was that we were trying to do and be aligned on what that messaging was, he looked at us and he told us, he said, look, I know that you don't recognize this today or right now, but this last 3 days that you just spent in the room, really getting clear and concise about what it is you're trying to achieve, these are by far the 3 most important days you'll probably spend on this program altogether. And you know what? He was absolutely right. every single one of those changes and projects and communications that we were trying to do to every single frontline employee across our organization, being able to tie that specific behavior change we're asking them to do back to the mission and the vision, and being able to connect those and then link them back to the stories and experiences of other organizations that had undergone process safety failures and near misses that we'd had within our own organization, was so incredibly powerful. As a matter of fact, I still go back and utilize this all the time to this day as we try to sustain these projects and programs. Earlier on, I'd alluded to the degree of change that the company was going through as a result of our clean energy transition. And what I want to touch on here is the impacted people. There were many, many, many hundreds of people in TransAlta at especially our coal facilities who ended up facing into job loss or a high degree of uncertainty with regards to whether they would have a job loss or not. As a matter of fact, we still have that today. With our Centralia coal facility continuing to operate. There's still a lot of uncertainty there for the individuals who are working in that facility. Now, through that transition, there were a handful of individuals that we were able to retain and reallocate to other projects and programs. And I was fortunate enough to be able to get a small team of those individuals myself to help drive forward some other projects I was working on. But when they first came over, I was really surprised at their mental headspace. They were incredibly well-grounded and seemed to be managing through the uncertainty that they had had up until a couple of weeks ago incredibly well. And dealing with the fact that so many of their colleagues who they'd worked with for 20 plus years were now facing into job losses and likely weren't going to be with the company anymore. And so I asked them, I said, like, how is it that you're handling this change so well? Because I'm not sure if I put myself in your shoes that I would be able to be in the same positive headspace that I see yourself in. And this was a big learning that I took from this change. The company, right from day one, when we realized that we were going to be making these decisions to shut down these assets and convert some of them to gas, but that it was going to have a major, major impact on the employee base. The company decided right from day one, our senior leaders, that they were going to put people at the center of this change. And one of the ways in which they put people at the center of this change was by being very intentional and deliberate about clearly, openly, honestly, just being utterly transparent with what was happening, with the business decisions that were getting made, with the impact that that would have on the employees and the employee base. And how much of a consequence that would have at a very individual level for the majority of our workforce at those facilities. And those employees who came to work with me, when they were telling me what helped them get through the change, it was the fact that this constant, consistent, clear, open communication didn't allow them anywhere to hide in their heads that they were facing into a job loss. It made them really face into it full on. This wasn't something that they could wait and see if it would go away. It absolutely was coming. It was absolutely going to impact them. And as a result of hearing that message consistently and thus internalizing that this was something that they were going to have to face into, it made them much more likely to seek out the support mechanisms that were being put in place by both the company and also the governments, education training, funding, and other such systems that were being made available to them. And they did. They took full advantage of the programs that were being put forth. As a matter of fact, one of the individuals who came to work for me had just finished his MBA, which had been sponsored through that program. And another one had just finished a college degree, again, supported by this program. But they all messaged that had they not had that clarity of communication, they might not have been as likely to take those steps and take those actions and thus put themselves in a better position. And as a result of the honest, ongoing, clear and transparent communication, there were no hard feelings towards the organization or the company either. They recognized why we were making the change, and they understood why the change was happening. They understood it was going to have an impact on them. So I think this is just a really great example of where being very, very deliberate and intentional about putting employees first, even if your change is going to have potentially a very negative personal outcome to them, can really help those employees. And ultimately, it set our company up in a better place because the individuals that we have retained, they're engaged and they're supportive and they're understanding of where we are. So that team that I mentioned, I had a small group of individuals who came over and they were helping me to work on a project just a few years ago, maintenance strategies project, as a matter of fact. So a very technical program. We were looking to implement more rigor in our reliability principles and practices and fundamentally change how our maintenance programs were being executed and delivered across the organization. And I had a lot of success getting to a yes, getting to the approval of the business case. But what perhaps I failed to recognize was why I got to a yes in relation to that project. And to help with this conversation, let me give you a bit more context. So TransAlta was implementing the process safety program, lots of change. We'd affected the work that every employee in our generation business was going to be doing. This was implementing over about a 3-year period. 3/4 the way through that, the organization also wanted to get moving on an innovation program. So this is a program where we wanted frontline employees from across the organization to put their hand up and identify things that were inefficient or not working very well. And we wanted them to not only put their hand up and bring these ideas forward, we intentionally allocated and reserved capital to be able to address those issues. And we empowered those employees, regardless of what their role in the organization, to be able to help take a lead on and drive some of these changes. But that program itself brought a tremendous amount of change to the organization. Not to mention the clean energy transition that we were going through, which was also bringing a lot of change to the organization. And in this whole mix, here I was proposing another huge lift and effort across every single one of our generation sites. And the reason I got to yes, now that I look back at it and I contemplate, is because that innovation program that we'd put together, that we'd gotten moving, it really created a situation where it was almost impossible for the leaders, if there was a good business case and you could demonstrate how the project aligned with the strategic direction and some of the changes we were trying to drive, it almost made it impossible for people to put their hand up and say, great idea. Yes, we want to do it, but can we have a breath? Let's maybe work on a few things and put this on the roadmap, or even come forward and simply say, no, we're not sure that we're ready to support and drive this kind of a change forward. And with any kind of project, there's going to be challenges and there's going to be issues. And it's that strong, engaged, constant support from the leadership that helps you to work through and overcome what those changes and challenges are. So in this instance, I hadn't done a good enough job of really judging the culture that got me to yes and got me approval. And as it turned out, after about 18 months, the various challenges we were facing into, they were mounting up. We weren't getting the prioritization of resources, and we weren't able to overcome many of them. We just didn't have the drive and the support behind us. So I ended up having to come forward and recommend that we pivot and put a pause on this scope and this work. And I don't blame the leadership. I actually put the blame on myself for not having properly judged the culture and recognized why I got yes and circled back to work on those underlying challenges or concerns that they had to make sure that they were in a position where they would be properly equipped to be able to support the project that we were trying to implement. So this next story is really about sustainment. I've had the benefit of working within an organization for an extended period of time. You see many things come, you see changes go, you see certain programs come into play, you see them stick around for a little bit, and over time the practices start to devolve. And then the organization decides, oh, wait a minute, that's not okay. We need to step this back up, and boom, you have a re-implementation program to try and get the practice back up to where it needed to be originally. So I've observed this at TransAlta, I think it's human nature for this to happen. Talking to colleagues in other industries and other companies, they see the same thing, right? And I personally believe that a large part of the reason why you see this big implementation effort and this investment to get to a better way of working, which presumably has a return, a value to your organization, and then it slowly degrades, is because the sustainment wasn't properly designed and wasn't designed right from day one. The day that you're proposing the change, you need to have sustainment in mind. What is that going to look like? What is that going to feel like? How are you going to make sure that that change stays and is successful until it's so well embedded in the organization that nobody would ever dream of doing it differently? And the benefit of having sustainment and achieving that level of sustainment is now you've got a stable base of which you can drive the next improvement and the next improvement and the next improvement, and you can really help drive the organization forward in a really effective way. So really think hard right from the beginning about what sustainment is going to look like, and be very deliberate and intentional as you're going through implementation, as you're seeing these practices and behaviors start to get adopted, to share those stories and keep sharing those stories and keep looking for new stories that support and reinforce the change that you've made and how much benefit and value it's created. Because those stories will help to reinforce the culture that ultimately will help support the sustainment efforts that you're going to hopefully design right from day one in the beginning. So those are the stories that I've got that I wanted to share today in relation to change and change management. This is a topic of much discussion. You certainly just go on to Google and do a Google search on organizational change management, and you'll see so many hundreds of articles come up. And it's because it's tough. It's not easy. What I would strongly encourage if you're looking to make a big change in your organization is seek out and find some really experienced organizational change management experts. They will help you think through the steps. They will help you get your messaging. They will help you focus on assessing where your people within the organization are, where you need them to be for these changes to be successful, helping you put strategies in place to help drive those changes, and then really sustain and measure them afterwards, and support the sustainment efforts. The other thing you can do is you can look and take inspiration from perhaps some non-traditional spaces. I've probably learned the most about change management actually from some of the training that we got internally through our behavioral-based safety programs. It really was probably one of the best leadership courses I've actually ever had, and touched on and gave me a lot of lessons that I still draw on for supporting different projects and programs that I deliver and continue to support today. Look at other industries. Talk to other people, find out what their experiences have been, what they've seen has worked and hasn't worked. And frankly, use yourself as well. We're all people. And what are we trying to do? We're trying to drive behavior changes in other people. Think about your personal experiences. When you want to make a change, lose some weight, healthier eating, put a bit more structure to your day, whatever it may be. What is it that you have found is helpful? What helps you to succeed with the changes that you're trying to drive personally? Think about that from a structural standpoint, and then take that and apply that to the changes that you're trying to drive in your organization. There's so many examples of successful organizational change. You just need to be out looking for them, and they'll make themselves available to you. So I'll end the talk there. Hopefully some of these stories have given you some thoughts and caused you to maybe perhaps think differently about some of the changes that you may be leading. And I'll see if there's any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Marina. That's very insightful. I like again, it stresses the people aspect of change management. And when you're doing digital transformation, you can throw technology at the problem, but you have to get the organization to change. And safety is actually a big driver, especially in industry. When they got the resiliency. My life my background civil engineering, so as a consequence, safety was job one, because the number of people, and also in the military, it was the number of people that died needlessly. What I would like to do is just throw the floor open to questions. Please use the Q&A box. Now, did you have a problem, Marina, did you have problems with the educational background of individuals when you were trying to establish change?
Well, I mean, training and education, I think, is a key part of any change that you're trying to drive, right? You want to equip people to be successful in adopting the change. And if that means you need to give them a bit more information or knowledge to understand the why you're doing it, or to understand how you're going to go about doing it, then I think you absolutely have to take that and support that. Now, the changes that we were driving, I mean, we were touching everything from frontline technicians, who might have like a trade certificate, all the way up to some of our most senior leaders and engineers and others. So these changes were really affecting everybody. And I found that consistently communicating the why and making sure they understood why and what you were trying to do were absolutely critical to the change. But I wouldn't say that we had to, make a massive investment in people's knowledge levels to get there. No, it was more about communication.
Great question. In terms of processes, people and technology in the energy sector's cybersecurity landscape, knowing that it's a constantly evolving, how do you adapt continually, assess and enhance your security measures to stay abreast of emerging threats, to stay ahead of emerging threats?
Yeah, so in the energy industry, there's, if you're familiar at all with it, there's NERC and FERC, and they're constantly out monitoring that space and understanding what new threats are emerging, trying to understand what kind of a level of risk that they might mean to organizations and to transmission grid operators for the electrical industry. And they make visible, they share out these experiences and stories and near misses. And then they also look to start driving and leveraging legislation to try and, well, not to encourage, but to mandate power generators to make and change their processes. So we have awareness before anything becomes a regulatory change, certainly of the risks that exist in industry, that allows us to more proactively be thinking about our own processes and practices that we have in the organization and what technology we have to secure those assets. And then we can take that and start factoring it into the decisions that we make on everything from new assets that we're bringing in to perhaps retrofitting of older assets to try and bring them up to a place where we can add more security in place. And then, of course, we work with the regulators to make sure that as these changes become required, we implement them within our facilities. And it usually means a combination of either software, physical equipment, physical security of our sites, and process, a lot of process change in terms of how we govern access and who gets access and how they can get access and controlling access as well. So I don't know if that answered the question, but hopefully that helped.
I think the aspect of combining process safety, the process of themselves and the physical security aspects, okay, are important, because I think it's often overlooked. Like often the cybersecurity folks, they say as well, the only tool they have in their toolbox is cyber, whereas sometimes physical security can resolve some of the issues. Now, physical security, you have connectivity constraints in terms of the industry. You just like it's.
Yeah, there's certain assets that certainly we air gap as an example to make sure that you can't access externally to be able to protect them. Again, that's sort of a measure of physical security. And we're very careful about how we even allow individuals to connect, even to do, a firmware upgrade as an example on some of those assets, right? We look at and examine any device that would get connected to any of those air gap systems. They get thoroughly vetted and tested to make sure that they're safe and secure. So it's, again, a combination of, process. You need people to follow those processes and practices, and technology having the capability to do that testing and assess and make sure that the threat is not there. But I will say, without you can put the best physical security and the best cybersecurity in place, but if you don't have the processes and the behaviors of the individuals in your organization, it won't be successful.
I think that's very prescient. That's very insightful. Well, Marina, thank you ever so much for your presentation. It was greatly appreciated. And no, that's super. I think a lot of people don't think of the energy sector as sort of being a leader in this area, but they certainly are. And they're the key to the future. It was interesting mapping your transition from existing fuel sources to the future. And the future is not that far off. You're talking 2025.
Yeah, we're actually quite a long ways along the change in the transition right now, you know, from certainly our coal assets. We've already moved from 11 operating coal units down to 1, and that 1 will be offline by 2025. So already well underway.
And that means a digital transformation all for control systems and basically sharing fundamental data so that you can detect problems before they become real problems and the like. It's
yeah, a lot of work in that space. Absolutely. Condition monitoring and predictive maintenance and other such strategies. Absolutely.
No, that's very valuable. Well, anyways, thank you ever so much for your insights. They were greatly appreciated. And
Thank you for having me.
you're very welcome. And good. Anyways, the presentation and the recording will be made available on site. I just wanted to let you know that there's other presentations coming up. The next set of presentations are Greg Lane and Caleb Walker for with the skills for the information age. We've got another one for process mining and robotic process automation with Naja Maria El-Garib. And then we got Bruno Willette, who's the director for enterprise architecture over at the Canadian Border Services Agency. And they're talking about digital transformation at CBSA. And in actual fact, it's an excellent example of how architecture enables digital transformation within a very large and very complex organization. So without further ado, I'm going to stop the recording